Now that we have discussed the placebo and nocebo response, let's investigate the different research methods used in psychological investigations: case studies, correlational studies, cross-sectional and longitudinal studies, experimental designs, ex post facto design, and meta-analysis. Case studies. Here is an example of a case study. Norman Cousins left the hospital against medical advice, suffering from collagen disease. He checked into a hotel where he spent several hours per day watching comedies. Laughter had an anesthetic effect, enabling him to sleep for 2 hours without other medication. However, this issue is far too complex to say laughter is a panacea. Correlational studies. Sometimes it's impractical to study issues experimentally. People cannot, for example, be randomly assigned to a disease. Correlational studies allow us to predict outcomes. Here is an example. Persons low in physical activity are more likely to have high blood cholesterol level. Variables related with certain diseases are risk factors. Because risk factors are determined by correlational studies, one cannot say they cause the disease. High cholesterol and heart disease is caused by many variables, and activity level may not be the most important one. Another example would be that people higher in hostility have a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. The disadvantage of correlational studies is that these types of studies cannot determine direction of effect. Did hostility cause the cardiovascular disease, or did cardiovascular disease cause people to become more hostile, perhaps because they are limited in what they can do? Cross-sectional and longitudinal studies. Example: if we wanted to know what factors are associated with early breast cancer in women at risk for it, we might follow a group of young women whose mothers developed breast cancer in an effort to identify which daughters developed breast cancer, and whether there are any reliable factors associated with the development, such as diet, smoking, or alcohol consumption. Experimental designs. In experimental designs, one group gets an experimental drug or intervention treatment, asthma education, and a second group unknowingly gets a placebo or nothing at all, the control group. These are also called randomized clinical trials, or RCTs. An example would be the Women's Health Initiative. In 1991, over 161,000 healthy postmenopausal women were given hormonal replacement therapy, HRT, or placebo. The study was stopped before completion because those taking pills were more at risk for heart disease. A 2008 study showed that even after stopping, women who received HRT still had higher risk of heart disease. Ex post facto designs. In ex post facto designs, the independent variable is selected after the fact, after a characteristic has been determined rather than manipulated. This is one of several types of quasi-experimental studies. The researcher can compare groups but does not manipulate the independent variable. Some examples of independent variables are type of diet, level of exercise, number of cigarettes smoked per day. The researcher will choose a variable of interest and choose subjects who differ on this variable, subject variable. This is a very common design used in health psychology research. However, a comparison group is not an equivalent to a control group because participants were not equivalent to those in the experimental group at the beginning of a study. For example, a person who smokes is probably very different in a number of ways that affect health from someone who does not smoke. For these reasons, no conclusions regarding causality can be made. Meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a quantitative synthesis of existing studies. Sometimes researchers want to resolve a question that remains because many studies have been conducted already, but with inconsistent results. In this case, they would combine the results from these studies and run a computer program called a meta-analysis. An example of a meta-analysis is the work of Kern and Friedman in 2008, which found that higher levels of conscientiousness were significantly and positively related to longevity. The researchers pooled results of 20 independent samples. This included more than 8,900 subjects from multiple countries. The effect of conscientiousness was greater than the effect of intelligence on mortality risk. This is an example of positive psychology because studies linking personality with objective health outcomes, such as all-cause mortality and cardiovascular heart disease, have focused on negative traits such as depression, type A personalities, and hostility. Meta-analyses show that health behavior of younger people is driven by different factors than that of middle-aged or older adults. For example, adolescents' physical activity is more strongly related to personality traits such as achievement, motivation, or sensation seeking than to specific beliefs about behavior, such as perceived benefits of exercise.